This is r/DnD Stories. Now let's take a look at a new campaign. Alright, looks like I'm now going to cover a new story series from Naiavita. This person doesn't really have overarching name for it, it's just their sessions is what they're calling it. So this would be Session 1 and Slippery Shoes. We officially started our foray into the lost mines of Phandelver, and boy oh boy, were our rolls bad. First off, we have Demos, the Tiefling Rogue, Naiavita Greymore, a Wood Elf Ranger, or the OP, Othan, High Elf Wizard, Thoril, Half Elf Barbarian, and Valanthia, a Half Elf Druid. We were well on our way along the trail when we were ambushed by a band of goblins. They managed to surround Thoril and hack away at him, but Othan charged one of them with a quick firebolt. Valanthia drew her bow and took a few pot shots at the others hiding in the woods, while Demos flanked them and drew their fire. Seeing two more rushing down the road, I drew my blades and dove into the fray. I slashed one of them, but he disengaged and made a run for it. The other? He tripped over dead horses in the road and enjoyed a nice bit of cold steel. After regaining his composure, Thoril made short work of him and lopped his head clean off. Valanthia charged into the woods as the remaining goblins tried to flee. Othan and Demos were not quick enough, but I lined up a shot and drove an arrow into one of their little green brains. Valanthia managed to pin the last one to a tree with a clean shot of her own. After hitching up our wagon, we followed the tracks left behind and made our way deeper into the woods. Sensing something was amiss, I noticed an uneven patch of leaves just ahead of us. A snare trap, no doubt, set by those goblins to catch wayward travelers. However, it was not the last trap. As I stepped over a twisted root, I heard the faintest snap. Too late. A pitfall began to open up beneath my feet. Thinking fast, I managed to grab hold of the root and just barely keep myself from tumbling down into the hole. Thoril hoisted me back up to my feet, and we pressed on. We came upon a small brook leading into a large cave mouth. As we neared the entrance, an arrow stuck me in the shoulder, knocking me to the ground. As I winced in pain, Demos and Valanthia raced across the stream and halted the goblins' charge. Valanthia conjured magical roots to ensnare one of them, and Othan gave one a flaming surprise. Fighting through the pain, it ran screeching at them right before Demos drove his dagger into its belly, spilling its innards across the embankment. Well, that's gory. After a short rest, we made our way into the cavern. Hearing snarling, I noticed a pack of wolves. They were chained in a small pocket of the cave, gnawing hungrily at the carcass of a rabbit. I dropped to a knee and held out a hand, beckoning one of them closer. A few tentative sniffs later, the growling stopped. As I gave them one or more belly rubs, Othan noticed a shaft going upwards into another chamber. With a smile, Thoril sidled over and clambered right up the sheer rock face. Try as I might, this was no tree. Again and again I slid down to the bottom, leaving me with a bruised bum and an even more injured ego. Suddenly, we heard voices. Ducking down, we realized that Thoril had just encountered Clarg, the bugbear who had taken up residence in these caves. Despite his charming disposition and baseline charisma, Thoril was unable to convince the even hairier brute that our intentions were peaceful. After losing both his longsword and his lunch money, our barbarian had to act fast. One of the bugbear's underlings peeked his puckered little head into the opening and saw the rest of us still playing with those thrice-darned hounds. But I was still on edge after the incident at the stream, and with my bow still in hand, I loosed an arrow. A direct hit. It plunged into his left eye, sending him screaming back into the darkness with a pained cry of, "Trouble! Big trouble!" Before Clark could act, Thoril lunged at him and landed a punch square at his face. The beast roared and tackled our intrepid barbarian to the ground. As the rest of us tried to scramble into the battle above, Thoril pushed the brute off him and swung a hand axe directly into the neck of his charging wolf. Before it could rear back, a second axe found purchase in its skull, dropping the lumbering lapdog to the cold ground. As I yet again slid down the slope like a sack of mud, Demos leaped over my head and began to climb. He even stopped halfway through to turn and instruct me on how one would climb such a slope. Oh, Demos, your days are numbered. Finally making it to the top, I was greeted with a slash to my leg and a near miss from another arrow. Failing to land more than a glancing blow on the big oaf, I was rewarded for my efforts with a very angry bugbear swinging a flail the size of a dog at my head. Still wounded, I braced for a hit, but found myself bathed in warm, soothing light. Valanthia had finished scaling up the entrance and used her divine powers to heal my wounds. Back in it again, I disengaged, and after another missed attack, Clarg was dead. The last melee combatant was quickly dissolved into a fine paste thanks to a combination of Valanthia's acid spray and Othin's firebolt. There remained just one goblin left. Old One-Eye Oscar tried his best to notch an arrow, but in his half-blind panic, he snapped his bowstring. I picked up the other one's scimitar and charged at him. He didn't even have time to react as I cut him to ribbons. Okay, so continuing on here, we're going to go straight into Session 2, Tunnel Rats and Gnats Aplenty. Recovering from our skirmish with the foulest bugbear this side of the Sword Mountains, we picked through the scraps left behind by victims of the goblin raids. Seeing a faint glint of steel illuminated by a nearby torch, I reached into a pile of rubble and pulled from it a finely polished scimitar. It was clearly stolen by the goblins, as one made by them would never be of such fine quality. And it matched my other scimitar nicely. I sheathed my short sword and stowed it in my bag, and slipped my new weapon into my belt loop. It was then that I noticed a sigil imprinted onto the side of a set of crates in the corner of the room. A rampant silver lion on a blue field. Hey, do any of you recognize this? I only spent a short time in Neverwinter, so I can't recall what it may be. Valanthia approached, and upon closer examination she perked right up. Oh, these belong to the Lion Shield Coster. These must be the supplies stolen from the Gundren's wagon when the goblins attacked. What is the Lion Shield Coster? A guild of some sort? I asked. Humans always have so many different groups in their busy little towns. It's hard to keep track of it all. Sort of, she replied. They're a merchant company that operates in these parts. They're also the ones we are supposed to deliver the supplies to when we're done here. Demos, having broken a dagger in the scuffle, opted to go check on the cart. We certainly didn't want to risk anything happening to our paycheck. He pushed a crate of goods back to the slope and used a length of rope to lower it safely back into the pens below. Just as we were about to divvy up the loot, Othin shushed the group and pointed into the corridor ahead. Above the splashing of water draining into a set of pools could be heard faint voices. Goblins, seemingly unaware of the mess we've made of their boss. Though difficult, I could make out a few words here and there. They seemed to be discussing what to do with the stolen supplies and wondering when the next raid would take place. Before we could decide on a plan of action, we heard the goblins begin to shriek, shouting, Intruder! Get them! Scanning the room, it seems our dear friend Thorol was trying yet again to make some new friends. It went about as well as it did the last time. I rushed to the mouth of the chamber with my bow drawn and planted an arrow right between the goblin's eyes. As he dropped to the ground, the other began to panic. Valanthia clasped her hands together, muttering a faint prayer. As she parted her hands, faint sparks of light danced between her fingers, and she flung the ball of light at the closest goblin. Her aim was a bit off, and the goblin managed to drop to the ground and avoid the flame. Othin raised his hands and rained magic missiles down on our foes, leaving them battered and weak. As Thorol cut one of their arms off, the last little nasty made a mad dash through a passage to the west. Try as we might, we could just barely keep pace with the little craven. As he rounded a corner, I heard his frightful cries answered by another group. Thinking fast, I fired another arrow into the dimly lit room and managed to score another kill. As the foul creature sputtered and fell, his allies fired a volley of arrows at the mouth of the chamber. I took cover in a narrow alcove as the others made their way into the line of fire. Thorol rushed in and drove his recovered longsword into the belly of his attacker, putting him down for the count. Once again, Valanthia conjured a burst of light, and this time it found its mark. Billows of flame sprung up around the goblin, who began a mad dance as he beat at the magical immolation. If only he knew. Othin was the last to enter and certainly made the biggest show of things. He brought his hands to his sides and, grinning from ear to pointed ear, clapped them together. A great fan of flame sprayed forth from his fingertips, enveloping the remaining goblins in a terrible conflagration. Suddenly, a voice cried out over the chaos. "Enough!" An armored goblin with blackened skin and piercing eyes held a ragged man by the cuff of his tunic over a small ledge in the chamber. While no more than 10 or so feet high, the man looked to be on his last breath. A fall like that could easily finish him off. Even in the dim light, we all recognized the captive. It was Sildar Hallwinter, the warrior who was escorting Gundren's wagon. This did not bode well for our employer. "You better put those weapons down right now, or this guy gets it. And, give me your gold, too." Clearly, this was his first time negotiating. I narrowed my eyes and spoke.
"Really? Look around you, vermin. Your cronies are dead, and so is your boss. And unless you want to join them, I suggest you put him down. Gently."
The others took a few steps forward, readying themselves for trouble, but the goblin looked surprised by my comment, and loosened his grip slightly. You killed Clark?" "Bring folks talk." "I've wanted that Gutash dead for years. It looks like I'm running the show now, and that means my price just doubled. All your gold, and all your other stuff too." A sharp, toothy grin spread across his face. Just then, Sildar squirmed in his captor's grip. Once the goblin was distracted, I saw my chance. I dashed up to the ledge and leapt up to the top. I dove forward and grabbed the goblin by the midsection, tackling him to the ground. As he kicked and fought to escape, I heard a sharp whistle. With a bit of effort, I spun him around and held him up to the edge of the drop. Thorel loosed an arrow at him, but the smoke in the air made the shot veer off and strike the cave wall. As I struggled to keep hold of the little wretch, Othin shouted a heads up and flung a firebolt straight into the goblin's chest, incinerating him as I leapt back. When the smoke settled, only a few scraps of armor remained. Helping the man to his feet, we asked him what had become of Gundren. He did not know, and only remembered being ambushed by the goblins and dragged here. With few other options, we made our way back to the cave. Having found a shortcut in the form of a set of short drops, we made our way back to the river. While both myself and Valanthia suffered a few scrapes as we fumbled about, Sildar took a nasty fall. Landing hard on his back, his wounds reopened and he began to cough blood. Thankfully, our resident druid was quick to act. As I propped him up, she managed to stem the flow of blood and stabilize the poor man. With a bit of help, Sildar dragged himself back to the river and out of the cave, wincing at the blinding sunlight. Before we left, however, Valanthia and I freed the wolves from the pens. It only seemed right. The sun was setting as we finally made it to Faldalin. After pawning some of the spoils and returning some of the supplies to the Lion Shield Coster, we made our way to the Stonehill Inn to rest. Having made a nice bit of coin selling off my old short swords, I bought everyone a round of drinks and rooms for the night. The refreshments seemed to jog Sildar's memory, and he recalled hearing the goblins muttering something about where they may have taken Gundren. A place called Cragmaw Castle. That was r/DnDStories. Now you better smash that like button and hit that subscribe because they could be mimics in disguise.